Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if the way our brains are wired as kids stays the same as we get older, especially when it comes to our mental health? Well, this new study dives deep into that exact question. So imagine we have a bunch of kids, and we're looking at their brains while they're just resting, not doing any specific task. We're specifically looking at how different parts of their brains talk to each other, which scientists call resting state functional connectivity, or RSFC. Think of it like watching how different cities in a country communicate with each other via phone lines. Researchers are trying to see if the patterns of these connections can help us predict things like how a child is feeling emotionally or how smart they are. The big question this study wanted to answer is, if we build a model to predict mental health based on brain connections in a 9-year-old, will that same model work for that same kid when they're 11 or 13? Or does the way our brain connections relate to our well-being change as we grow up? The researchers used data from a big study called the Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study, or ABCD study. They looked at kids at 3 different ages, around 9 to 10 years old, then again around 11 to 12, and finally around 13 to 14 years old. They used brain scans to map out those brain connections. They also collected information about the kids' mental health and their cognitive abilities. Basically, how well they could think and learn. They used a fancy statistical technique called principal component analysis, or PCA, to understand the big picture of how brain connections change with age. They wanted to see if the overall pattern of how brain regions are connected stays the same, or if it shifts as kids get older. And what they found was that the way the brain's connections are organized does change quite a bit between these ages, even over just a couple of years. They actually showed that the connections in older kids' brains didn't explain the same amount of variance when applied to the younger kids' data, and the difference was even bigger going the other way. From older to younger, this means the brain's wiring, its functional connectome, is definitely reorganizing as kids move through these stages. They also looked at how specialized different brain networks become. Think of brain networks like different departments in a company. They found that some networks, like the ones involved in attention and vision, became more distinct and specialized as kids got older. Others, like sensory-motor networks, became more integrated, meaning different parts work together more closely. This is like some departments in that company becoming more focused on their specific task, while others start collaborating more broadly. Now, here is where it gets really interesting, directly answering our main question. They built prediction models using brain connections to see if they could guess a child's cognitive ability or mental health score. And yes, at each specific age, their models could predict these things to some extent. For example, they could predict general cognitive ability with about 12% accuracy at age 9 to 10, and around 8% at age 13 to 14. For mental health, the predictions were generally lower, which is common in this kind of research, but still significant. But here is the kicker. They then took models trained on, say, 9-year-olds and tried to use them to predict the mental health of 13-year-olds. What they found was that these models often didn't work very well when applied to a different age group. The predictions were significantly worse when the training data was from a different age than the test data. This was especially true for mental health. It was like trying to use a map of one city to navigate another completely different city. The general connections might be there, but the details are all wrong. This is the core message from the researchers. They found that the way our brains connect and how those connections relate to our mental health are constantly changing as we grow from late childhood into early adolescence. It is not a fixed system. They also looked at specific brain connections. While some connections seem to consistently relate to cognitive ability or certain aspects of mental health across all ages, many others changed their strength of association as the kids got older. This means a specific brain connection might be strongly linked to, say, anxiety in a 10-year-old. But that link weakens or strengthens differently by the time they're 14. These changes in brain connections were happening alongside that overall reorganization of the brain they talked about earlier. It suggests that as the brain structure and its network communication evolve, so do the ways these networks are linked to our behaviors and emotions. So what does this all mean for us? The biggest takeaway is that we can't just assume that what we learn about brain mental health links in one age group will automatically apply to another. If we find a brain pattern linked to depression in adults, it might not be the same pattern in teenagers or children. This is super important for things like developing diagnostic tools or treatments for mental health issues. It means that for an effective biomarker or treatment to work across different ages, it might need to be adapted or retrained for specific developmental stages. What works for a 10-year-old might need to be adjusted for a 14-year-old. Of course, Like all research, this study has its limits. They mentioned that they had less data for the oldest age group. This means their findings for that age might be a bit less solid because there were fewer people to study. Also, the way they measured mental health and cognition used a statistical method called PCA. This is great for finding patterns, but it can sometimes make it a bit harder to directly link those patterns to establish labels for mental health conditions. And they used a brain map that was originally created for adults, which might not perfectly capture all the unique ways the younger brains are organized. Despite these limitations, the main finding is super clear. Brain-mental health relationships are dynamic during childhood and adolescence. This study is a huge step in understanding how our brains and minds develop together. It tells us that development matters, and we need to consider it when we're trying to understand mental health. It makes me wonder what other brain signals might change in this way as we grow. Are the brain connections related to learning new skills also changing drastically? And how do these ever-changing brain behavior links play into the challenges kids face during these crucial years? This is a fascinating look into the developing brain and its connection to our inner world. What do you think about these findings? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this interesting, be sure to like this video, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science breakdowns, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the mysteries of the mind. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.